What is the scariest story? You know that is 100% true.
Silent scan.
I would call it creepy more than scary. But my mom's friend had a small house and lived alone. She noticed weird things. A batch of soup depleting faster than usual. Missing eggs. Damp towels in the hamper when she hadn't used any. Extra dishes in the dishwasher, etc. This went on for months. She thought she was just being forgetful. One day she heard some thumping around in her attic and went to investigate. She found some makeshift living quarters. Small radio, hot plate, sleeping bag, pillow, food wrappers, etc. She called the cops, who came to keep an eye on the place. They ended up catching a homeless man, climbing a tree, trying to sneak into her attic window. He had been doing this almost daily. He would wait for her to go to work, then go downstairs, and help himself to food and amenities. The funny part about this story is, they got to know each other throughout the ordeal. And the guy was actually very respectful. Just down on his luck. She didn't press charges. Instead, let him move in, helped him get a job, and he lived in the attic until he got back on his feet. Creepy shit. With a happy ending.
Silent scan.
My mom was driving, and a guy ran out in the road, so she stopped, so she couldn't hit him. It was nighttime, so it was pretty dark out, and 3 other men emerged from the forest around, all trying to use the door handles of her car to get in. She locked them luckily, and gassed it to the nearest town. Remember to always lock your car after you start it, because if it wasn't unlocked, who knows what would have happened to her.
Silent scan.
Nishiba train disaster is something that reminds me how death can come at any moment. A train with 51 wagons of sulfur, fertilizer, petrol, and cotton wool somehow broke loose and rolled down the track about 20 kilometers until it derailed in the town of Cain, Iran. There were no humans on board. Chemical leaks ensued, and authorities tried to extinguish whatever fires broke out. At one point, the whole thing explodes. And it really explodes. The whole town of Cain is literally demolished. 3 nearby towns are badly damaged, and it was heard 70 kilometers away. The wreckage continued to explode for several days after. Around 300 people died, and more than that injured. An earthquake of 3.6 on Richter scale was produced.
Silent scan.
My friend's boss bought an Audi A4 convertible, back when they were new and interesting. One of the talking points was the pop-up roll hoops that were hidden unless you rolled it. A few months after buying it, he got to test those roll hoops out, as he lost control and skidded down a steep bank about 10 meters 35 feet deep. The roll hoops did their job, and he survived with just cuts and scratches from the bushes he plowed through. The car ended up the right way up and he got out, walked back up the bank to the side of the road, then got on the phone to the police to report the accident. While he was standing there, the driver from a car that had seen the accident came over to speak to him, approaching from behind. The other driver asked if he was okay. My friend's boss turned around to reply, and dropped dead. His neck had been fractured, but was in one piece right up until he turned his head, when it severed his spinal cord.
Silent scan.
Various torture murders are probably the most horrific things I've read about. Junko Furuta, who was a perfectly normal girl, until she was kidnapped off the street by a gang for no reason. Purely wrong place, wrong time, according to Japanese sources, and unimaginably RPed, and tortured to death over 44 days. Kiki Camarena, a D agent in Mexico, who was kidnapped by the Guadalajara cartel and tortured to death over about 3 days. His story is the central focus of the show Narcos, Mexico, but from what I've read, his death was even more brutal than what they make it out to be. A detail consistent in both is that they brought in a doctor to revive him numerous times when he got too close to death, and keep him conscious so he couldn't pass out from the pain. Kellyanne Bates, who was groomed from a young age by a scumbag, who eventually killed her slowly, over the course of about a month in their apartment. Her injuries were so horrific, the jury at the guy's trial had to get counseling. For example, her eyes were missing, and there were stab wounds in the sockets. Sylvia Likens, his parents left her in the care of a woman, who both personally, and with the help of her children, and their friends degraded, tortured, and killed over several months. The Hello Kitty murder in China, where a man and his about 13-year-old girlfriend kidnapped a prostitute who had supposedly stolen from him, even though sources say she had paid him back with interest, tortured her to death, and then stuffed her corpse into a Hello Kitty toy. Baby Brianna, a newborn whose mother, father, and uncle tortured, and RPed her from the second they brought her home from the hospital until the second she died. Baby P, a British toddler, his mother let her boyfriend torture him to death. His back was broken in his last days of life. Honestly, There are just so many horrifically on par with each other. You could list them all day.
Silent scan.
A female friend in college disappeared from a party at another university in the city town 25-ish miles north of our school. She had arrived with another friend who I believe had driven. At some point she split off to play cornhole or something and was later inexplicably gone. Phone calls went to voicemail. Police were called, but she was simply missing. About 10 days later, she was found by a homeless man who witnessed her crawling up to a bus stop in the city, begging for help. She had broken a leg and an arm, and was in very bad shape. At the quite large party, she had her drink secretly drugged, and was then let off by a group of men into their vehicle. She was taken to an apartment, where she was drugged, repeatedly RPA'd, and locked in a small room, in between with a bucket to use as a bathroom. At one point after being injected with heroin and RPA'd, she somehow managed to convince one of her captors to allow her to use the actual bathroom to clean herself up. This bathroom had a small window to the outside, and with the shower running, she managed to squeeze out and fell from the 3rd story into a large hedge bush. From there, she crawled from the apartment complex to the road and bus stop, where the homeless man saw her and called police. Many cars stopped upon seeing her, making her captives unable to recapture her. 3 men were later arrested for the crime, after surveillance cameras allowed police to locate the apartment, which she jumped from. She returned to our university, almost 2 years later, graduated, and became a nurse. She was obviously traumatized, never partied again, carried a gun everywhere she could, and somehow moved on with life. It was a terrifying tale none of us ever forgot. She was an 18-year-old freshman when the incident happened.
Silent scan.
When my aunt was about 16, she was working at a grocery store and had a boss in his mid-20s. One day he called the house and was begging her to sneak out and hang out with him. She was considering it because it was her boss, and she didn't want to say no. My mom, who is 2 years younger than he, always gets these incredibly spot-on gut feelings. She had one that night and begged my aunt not to go out with him. Thankfully, she listened to my mom and told him no, which made him really angry. He ended up going out that night and meeting another girl. He took her out to some cliffs and RPA'd her and pushed her off. Somehow, she lived through Thigh.S and was able to get him sent to prison. I feel so sorry for that girl, and so thankful for my mom and her gut feelings. Always trust your gut.
Silent scan.
I spent my first 10 years in New Delhi. Back then, we would find dead women, burned with acid or set on fire. And it used to be so normal. Like, oh look, another one of those dowry cases, where her family didn't pay the husband enough money, so they killed her. Many years later I revisited those memories, and realized how insane that actually was. I'd totally forgotten about all that.
Silent scan.
The driver one of the semis we took in on trade died in the truck. The sleeping area is a bunk, with a mattress that can be flipped up, and under it is a seat and a table. So during the why it's a dinnet setup, and at night, you pull a lever, and pull the bunk down to sleep. Well, something happened, and the bunk flipped up while the driver was sleeping, and it pinned him against the wall. He couldn't get it to drop back down, and suffocated. He was stuck there for somewhere around 12 hours. Someone had noticed that he was parked for an unusually long amount of time for the kind of deliveries he did. The company that built the sleeper did something to the bunk so that couldn't happen again, and supposedly recalled all of that sleeper style.
Silent scan.
During World War II, an American airplane crashed near the Japanese island of Chichijima. There were 9 servicemen on board. One was rescued by an American submarine. The other 8 were taken in by the Japanese. Don't want to go into all the details, but through some time and events, the Japanese ended up eating those servicemen. But that's not the weird part. The one serviceman who was rescued, that was George H.W. Bush. Google Chichijima incident for more details if you'd like.
Silent scan.
The Battle of the Sowiec Fortress, 1915. German troops attempted to gas the Russian defenders out, as the fort had been a thorn in the side of the Germans since the outbreak of war. The gas succeeded in killing almost 3 whole companies. The Germans then advanced across the field, expecting the fortress to be empty and an easy victory. From within the fortress, Russian troops emerged, coughing up blood and lung fragments, covered in bandages made up as improvised gas masks, as well as chemical burns. They returned rifle and light artillery fire at the advancing Germans. The German troops didn't bother firing back, as they just ran back to their lines. Their commanders claimed they're already dead. Give it 20 minutes, and go take the place. To which the soldiers remarked, "It is not men protecting that place, but the devil." A Soviet fortress never fell during the war, as when the German troops went back months after, there was already fresh defenders. I know this story is much different to the ones other people have said, but it's the one I could think of as truly terrifying.
Silent scan.
The vampire rap St. He abducted, Arpad, and murdered multiple women. He got caught when one of the women escaped from his house after she was abducted off the road and woke up naked, tied to his kitchen table. He was filming her, Arpad her, and, here's the bizarre part, drained her blood and drank it repeatedly. She escaped from his bathroom window, still naked, and ran to the road, where she was picked up and taken to the hospital. Miraculously, she lived. There's a lot of interesting detail in this story, so I highly recommend reading more about it yourself. To me, it's the most terrifying situation I can possibly imagine.
Silent scan.
My brother-in-law is a deranged heroin addict, has been for over a decade. In 2016 he murdered my father-in-law. He attacked him from behind and crushed his head, back, shoulders with a hammer over 50 times. My husband and I were out of town, and he used my father-in-law's phone to text us throughout our trip. He lived with my father-in-law's dead, decomposing body for over 5 days, and proceeded to steal his father's belongings and pawn them, drain his bank accounts, and stole his car. When we got home he fled and sent my husband a text from his dad's phone saying he wasn't feeling well and was in the bathroom. That's when my husband found the body. He's in jail now serving 24 years, but it still haunts me.
Silent scan.
A family friend was cleaning her bus before the bus run. She had 2 small kids who were strapped into car seats in the bus. She swept the floor and was standing outside the bus leaning in, using a dustpan and brush to collect the dirt she had swept up. The auto doors on the bus kicked in and closed on her neck. She suffocated while her 2 young children looked on, unable to do anything because they couldn't undo their car seat buckles.
Silent scan.
80-year-old dude at my grandfather's church went swimming when he was a kid in an old mining quarry with his cousin. They were both kids like 7 to 10. Long story short, some mine or air bubbled down below the water opened up and swallowed the cousin. He had to walk back home and tell his family. They got a search and rescue down there and could never find the boy.
Silent scan.
The toy box killer and his transcripts. If you absolutely want to have your day end, this has to be one of the most disturbing, creepiest things ever. Serial killer David Parker Ray would play these tapes for his victims, so they had an idea of what was coming, and to also mentally break them. Hear the start of one tape to give you an idea. Hello there. BTCH. Are you comfortable right now? I doubt it. Wrists and ankles chained, gagged, probably blindfolded. You are disoriented and scared, too, I would imagine. Perfectly normal, under the circumstances. For a little while, at least, you need to get your shit together and listen to this tape. It is very relevant to your situation. I'm going to tell you, in detail, why you have been kidnapped, what's going to happen to you, and how long you'll be here. I don't know the details of your capture, because this tape is being created July 23, 1993, as a general advisory tape for future female captives. Can you imagine how terrifying it would be to wake up in a place you didn't know and have someone play these tapes for you, telling you what horrible things were going to happen to you before you died?
Silent scan.
It happened to my mom's friend a couple of years back. She was driving on the highway in the middle of nowhere, as in far away from any town. Suddenly a car that is passing on her left steers fully to the right in front of her, causing her to brake and steer very rashly. This obviously causes her to lose control and crash against a tree. She passed out, and sometime later, she couldn't really tell how much time passed. A group of Brazilians, all of this happened in Portugal, came to her rescue and told her things like, "Don't move, we're calling an ambulance, just hang on there," etc. She eventually passes out again, and about 2 hours later, someone else comes and starts helping her again, and eventually the ambulance and her husband arrive. She tells them that some other people have been there before, but the guy that found her says no one was there. When they checked the trunk, everything had been stolen, including computer, camera, etc. She later said that she remembers thinking the car that made a crash had been following her for a while and driving a little too close. Make of that what you want. Sorry for my English.
Silent scan.
From when I was delivering pizza, I walked up to a trailer park house and knocked. Dude answers the door wearing a swastika armband, and he's bald. I tell him the total, and he invites me inside. Well, he gets the money, There's 10 more dudes. All bald. All wearing armbands. Sitting in a circle in metal chairs. Guy gives me the money. I go to leave. He grabs my arm. And gets in my face. And asks, "Do you like NRS?" I don't want to be murdered. So I respond, "Nope. Not at all. Hate those F-curs." And leave as quick as possible. The scary part is every other delivery driver. But me that night was black. And they might have never been seen again if I didn't take the delivery.
Silent scan.
Probably the one about the guy at a local factory. Who went inside one of the welding machines. I think that's what they are called. To clean. Or do some kind of maintenance. And somehow, despite all the safety protocols, another employee kicked it on. Apparently the moment it happened, the employee that did it realized his mistake. But there was no way to stop it once it started the firing cycle. Yes, the man inside died pretty quickly. But I cannot imagine being the person who made such a horrible mistake.
Silent scan.